Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about moving data, how we can move data faster and better, and how we can get value from data even as we move it. To discuss all that, I'm joined by Jeff Fochtman, Senior Vice President at Seagate. Jeff, hello to you and happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to you, and thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure being here. I was mentioning to you in kind of the pre-warm up, I don't do a lot of these,
Mhm.
but I certainly listen. And so it's nice to be on, and I hope we can have a chat that other people find informative.
Absolutely, and I know, of course, we've got the big holiday, so just be coming up on Halloween. Have you decided what you're going to dress as for Halloween this year?
Yeah, well, it's a big topic around my house. Yeah, it's the Friday before Halloween weekend, and yeah, I have maybe the world's worst stormtrooper costume. I went to the cheap rack and I have a zip up stormtrooper costume. So hopefully that passes muster for my kids.
Yeah, I've been sort of leveraging my Batman costume for the last few years, but it's getting kind of tired. I don't know. I'm not sure about this, so we'll figure it out on Sunday, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually my kids barred me from wearing my Gandalf wizard outfit yet again. So I had to go to plan B.
Great. So we are living in a world where moving data is paramount. It's like what business is all about today, and with the dramatic growth in both edge and multi-cloud, data has to move all over the place really quickly, often. So, what are some of the challenges there that you say?
Yeah, it's data's been moving around the world for a very long time now, since the origins of computing and the internet, as the internet first started in peer-to-peer data trafficking over the network. And it's also been moving in other ways. A typical way that data has moved in the past is a term that maybe it's in the industry a little too much, but we call it sneaker net. So instead of
I've not heard of
internet,
SneakerNet.
well,
Please
yeah,
tell me.
it's a very sophisticated term talking about your shoes, right? Your sneakers. And so how do you move data around? You walk it around. You walk it from one side of the building to the other. So
Right.
that was something that we've talked about for many years called sneaker net.
Well, like
And
on a thumb drive or a hard drive, you mean?
that's right.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. So that's really how data movement started, was moving it from one terminal to another.
Hmm.
And that sneaker net term's been around for a very long time. And that's still the case. So if you think about the physical movement of data, when data is physically moving offline,
Hmm.
broadly, we can call that an old term. It's sneaker net,
Right. I
physical
love
data
that. Yeah.
transport. But really what's been revolutionary over the last 20 years has been networking protocols and the movement of data, both wireless and wired. And Seagate, we have a term for our kind of current world. We call it the data sphere. We are in the data sphere. And
Mhm.
it's a term evocative of atmosphere, and the atmosphere is all around us. Increasingly, we're in a technology and data dependent world. And if you
Mhm.
think about it, literally there is data moving around all around you. When
Mhm.
you hold your phone up for better services, it's to retrieve and send data from your
Mhm.
phone, that connectivity. Literally, there's data passing in the atmosphere around us. Data's everywhere. And it's only growing in size. So, therefore, the need to move it to where it needs to be becomes a greater challenge as that size grows. So, at Seagate, we talk about data growth also being amplified with this concept or a problem statement of data sprawl. Data
Mhm.
is in more places around an enterprise or a consumer's life. So, how
Right.
does it move across those? It's growing in network pipes, but we also now see it growing in the sneaker net or physical data transport because of the large volume of data out there.
Well, on that sneaker that net theme, I've seen a big truck. I think it was on the Amazon Web Services conference. I think at one point they actually pulled a truck onto stage to show you, hey, we can literally move your data by truck if we need to. So it's sort of like the advanced form of sneaker net.
That's
So
right.
really, sneaker net is not gone yet.
Well, yeah, you're right. And I don't want to speak for AWS or Amazon's
No,
products for them, but I'm
right,
actually always impressed with what they do. And I've looked into that. So that product you talk about is their snowmobile. Their
right.
18 wheeler truck is called Snowmobile, and it's under their service, their Snowball service, which is
Mhm.
really a service based on ingesting massive amounts of data into their cloud. It
Right.
is very hard if you have an on prem data center with over 10 petabytes of storage, or all the way up to an exabyte of storage for some massive customer set out there, to
Right.
pipe that over even the fastest internet pipes and fiber pipes in the world. It takes a very long time.
Right.
And so sometimes it's just faster to send an 18 wheeler that has racks in it, throw a fiber line into a data center, pull it into the truck, and then take that truck to the data center that you need it to be. And that's the ultimate, that's the massive macro version of SneakerNet.
Mhm.
And the entire Snowball service that Amazon runs, it gets all the way down into much smaller physical drives. Now,
Hmm.
their product, that Snowball service, also has a compute service and an edge service, but it's built around this concept of data ingestion to the cloud. How do you get big data sets to where it needs to go, or from edge to core, is some terminology that we would use. And that product, which is centric to Amazon's cloud, is very similar to a product that Seagate has launched, which is much more independent and meant to be a data transfer service independent of cloud. And
Okay.
that's a product that Seagate calls Live Mobile.
Yep.
And that's a product that, I won't go hard at propaganda with you, but it's and pitch it too hard. But it is emblematic of this need of moving massive data sets. And essentially, it takes physical products. And think about, a lot of people know Seagate as hard drives, and you should, because
Right.
we produce more of the world's storage through hard drives, and more of the world's storage, period, because hard drives store most of the world's information than any other manufacturer.
Sure.
But these solutions for data transport are much more than a hard drive. It can be hard drive or it can be SSD, but they're basically massive data arrays, physical products that tend to be around 100 terabytes each. And they're
Mm.
meant for mobile, rugged solutioning and to move data physically around. And that's
Mm.
exactly what Live Mobile is. But instead of ingesting to one specific cloud, it can move from an on-prem data center to another on-prem data center, or from a traditional data center into any cloud.
Hmm.
And we see that. You started with, how has this been changing? Well, we see there's an inflection point happening. Everything that we've talked about has been true for traditional IT, traditional data sets, massive growth, massive sprawl, and the need to move them over network pipes and physical data shuttles.
Mhm.
But what we're seeing is an even larger shift as you look at new data sources, largely unstructured data that comes off IoT platforms. So
Right.
think about the sensors on autonomous vehicles
Sure.
and that sort of thing. Much larger data sets, all initiated at endpoints that are geographically diverse. It really takes this need that traditional IT has and multiplies it, times 100, times 1,000 in some cases, in regards to the data sizing. And so we see it, we're in an inflection point. We're at a very early period where we see this new unstructured data sets coming on.
Are you talking about are those unstructured data sets, they're moving from the edge to the core, or they're being processed at the edge more
That,
these days, correct?
that's actually completely accurate. In fact, the data orchestration or the data workflow can be different even within an industry or within a sector or from company to company. There is no one exact data workflow or data orchestration based
Right.
on vertical or use case type. It's very centric to the actual flow needed from a certain amount of data and a certain amount of usage. And it's very fun to watch it. It is early days when we talk about the next generation of unstructured data and AI and ML and all these buzz terms. It's
Mhm.
really happening, is what I would
Hmm.
say. And we're seeing practitioners, it's very garage oriented. So instead of scaled traditional infrastructure where they're trying to cut costs and figure out how to optimize, you're seeing things that are more duct tape and glue and out of the back of the garage. By the way, these garages I'm talking about are massive laboratories owned by the biggest
Right.
companies in the world, but they
Right.
are experimental and they are evolving in many different ways. To your point, there is not one way to move data or orchestrate data.
All right. So, what if we turn this idea on its head in terms of, I'm sure many companies are looking at all the data they have in distributed environments and going, wow, this is really a headache. What if we turn that from a negative to a positive? How can we get more value from data in distributed environments?
It's a great question. And you're right that data is a big headache for practitioners and companies and enterprises. It's also the path to success. Both
Hmm.
of those things can be true. The companies that have figured out how to create a data operations or a data workflow to maximize the usage of their data are
Hmm.
the leading companies in the world now
Oh,
because they've done
definitely.
that. So I would tell everyone listening, if you're in the point where your data is a headache, that you should aspirationally try to solve those problems that you have. But
Mhm.
essentially, the way we look at it is most enterprises are throwing away or not utilizing the data that they're creating. So Seagate Research, along with IDC, we have a stat that pops to mind in relation to what you said, is that 68% of enterprise data is either thrown away or never used.
Really? It
68%,
so
right?
most of it is actually wasted when in fact there's
Wasted.
actually, golden value to that data.
There's golden value, and the companies in the world who have realized that value, the leading hyperscale and public cloud companies in the world, their CTOs would shudder if they looked at 68% of the data getting thrown away before it was utilized, because
Right.
their monetization strategies are essentially based on owning more data. There's a great quote by Peter Norvig, who's a senior technologist at Google, about he has this quote that he says, Google doesn't have better algorithms, we just have more data. And
Mm.
I don't know if I'm getting his quote perfect, but that's the
Mhm.
paraphrasing in it. I laugh because it's a little bit of a self condescending remark, because they do have better algorithms. But the fact is,
Right.
they've understood that more data is better. The more you
Right.
can get, the more optimizing and insights you can gather. So it's absolutely true. So if you think about only 32%, if you think about on average, of data is even being utilized at all, the
Right.
question is why? Well, it's hard. It's those headaches you talk about. So data is growing in size, but it's stranded in islands or pockets.
Hmm.
And those pockets build up over time, and that causes what's called data gravity. So
Mhm.
when data gets big to a certain size, whether it's out on the edge or in the core, it becomes very hard to move once it's become aggregated at certain size. So you need to proactively plan for the data creation and the usage before it happens. And that can be talked as data workflow or data orchestration. But what it comes from is thinking about within your IT or your CIO or your operations department, to think about data operations firstly.
Okay.
How is my data going to be created? Who needs to use it and where? And how do I want to think about the data lifecycle over time? And data lifecycle is essentially can be brought down to create, use, retire.
Hmm. Okay.
And if you think about it in those phases and create a data operations workflow, then you can maximize the use of data. It's not about storing everything, it's about maximizing the use and understanding what value you can extract.
All right, so you've kind of talked about this, but I'd love to get you a sense of sort of, summing it up, so to speak. So what sort of storage strategies can reduce the impediments to the movement of large data sets and getting more value? I mean, you've talked about it a bit. I'd love to, get the key points. What's the storage strategy we should be looking at?
That's right. So first of all, we everyone should look at their long-term costs, their storage costs, and because a lot of the reasons why data is being deleted is that people get surprised at the costs of the storage for the data that they do have and they are using. So taking a proactive approach to data operations and data workflow can also allow you to take a proactive approach to your cost, your TCO cost, your total
Okay.
cost of ownership over the life cycle of the data. So I would have that lens regardless of if you were a startup sprinting towards revenue or a large company.
Okay.
So as you do that, then you should look to optimize your complete technology infrastructure costs. So that leads us back to when should I be moving data over physical transport means, or when should I be moving them over network pipes? And
Right.
then what vendors and suppliers should I choose as I knit my platform together to create the best usage, but also the best TCO, total cost of ownership?
Hmm.
As you start to look at that, some things become very apparent. If you are a traditional company where your data is known and it's structured, I think you have a very different view of how to optimize that TCO value. You're really going to look for your long-term cost drivers and try to lower those by utilizing the services available in the world today.
Mhm.
If you are a digital nativist company and a company built on these sensors creating data, I think you have a very different approach, and that approach revolves mass data. When you get into mass data, when you're talking about 10 petabytes of data or over, just to
Okay.
put a size on it right now at a point in time,
Right.
you need to start looking at an edge infrastructure so that your data gravity is not only in core cloud. You need to have an edge infrastructure so that you're not just throwing data into a cloud and absorbing long-term cloud costs and data that you don't know what to do with yet. So I would say starting with the data where it's created and figuring out what your edge architecture is going to be around that to aggregate and cache that data before deciding what to do with it long term. That's probably the starting point if you're a digital nativist company and you have a lot of unstructured data coming in, those massive data sets. With a traditional company, you're going to kind of think of it opposite. You probably already have a dense core. You may be a traditional on-prem company that might want to look at moving to the cloud, or you already might be a multi hybrid cloud. And in that case, you may be suffering from sticker shock and
Mhm.
absorbing costs that you didn't expect by pushing all your data into the cloud. And so that's a different view where there's also techniques in regards to data management. How do you stop this ongoing funnel of just putting data that you might not need into places that you're absorbing long-term costs from? So I'd say it's two different views based on, are you coming from a data intensive endpoint focus or a traditional IT core stack endpoint? But both of them are going to evolve around data gravity. Where do you want your data to build up, and who needs to use it? Who is the user of the data, and where is it going to build up, and to construct that data gravity view?
When you talk about the digital nativists, and I
Yes,
think probably more and more of the companies are digital nativists these days, it seems
correct.
like one of their problems is they can't even fully anticipate what their data needs are going to be because they're going to be way different next year than this year. So it's sort of like the idea of sitting down and planning that out could be really hard. True?
It is, but it's in many of them, it is structurally something they have to do, or they won't survive even their early years of
Hmm.
incubancy. So, and you're right, by the way, most companies nowadays, a new company is going to start completely digital. They might, completely go cloud and utilize the compute cloud services to get going. And to be honest, everyone thinks about cost, but most of those companies are going to think about scale and revenue firstly, and they should. That said, in order to get the value of the data, and most of these companies are providing a data window to the end consumer. So whether it's a B2C digital nativist company or a B2B digital nativist company, the data itself is providing the monetization, and the downstream user is going to be pulling insights from it.
Hmm.
And so therefore, the control of the data and the utilization of the data has to start one-to-one. And we've seen it, we've seen the challenges real time. So this is where we are having a lot of fun in this inflection point, in this kind of laboratory environment, this open lab environment of many companies figuring out what massive data sets, how to control that sprawl from the start.
Hmm.
One interesting vertical, because there's many horizontals that are similar, but one interesting vertical here is ADAS, the autonomous vehicle data collection that's happening in order to create fully autonomous vehicles in the future. So the AI modeling needed to do that causes an incredibly complex, massive data challenges from the car to the edge to the cloud and core. And
Mhm.
already we've seen people kind of go down some pathways that cause them to cul-de-sac and have to redo their initial data build out because they hadn't thought about that data gravity or data sprawl accurately from the start. So that data orchestration or data workflow really needs to be built in, whether you're a startup or a massive technology company.
All right, so let's look to the future. I mean, I think it's only going to get more harder, I mean, more complicated and more distributed in the world ahead.
Correct.
What do you see as the future of storage in a distributed world? I mean, you think about 5 years from now, it's going to be like almost hard to anticipate. But still, I ask you, Jeff, what is your vision?
Well, I think the current thing that we're seeing is data growth and data sprawl. Those are the
Right.
challenges that people are actively addressing, and we're part of that. Our 100 terabyte in-car data ingest solution that slots into the rack, that product I promise not to do too much propaganda on, but that is
Yes.
specifically meant to help alleviate a data growth challenge at the edge based on autonomous vehicle sensors and things like that. That's one vertical. So there are many things being done by many companies to overcome data growth and costs and data sprawl, data gravity, complexity. What I would say is, as we look farther out, 5 or 10 years, I think as those problems get solved, we'll have another problem yet to solve. And
Yeah.
that problem has to do with data sovereignty and data trust.
Okay.
So data sovereignty and data trust is a broad spectrum of things that encompasses security, which is probably the table stakes issue left to be solved. And we see a ton of issues in security, be it cybersecurity with ransomware threats and all of these things within the data and technology landscape. They are very real. Security for data itself is probably a table stakes that we're in a good place, but the world has a lot more work left to do. After that, though, the concept of who owns your data, how is it being monetized, data sovereignty to address governance and data complexity within different geographic regions and what the laws and rule sets about where data must be held.
Compliance. Right.
Compliance, GDPR type compliance, that becomes the next tranche of what needs to be solved. And I think we are going to see over the next 10 years some incredible breakthroughs in regards to data privacy, data provenance, data ownership, and data sovereignty. Really, really, really interesting.
What might be one of those breakthroughs? Be curious.
I would introduce another buzz term. So I think we're all in on AI as a buzz term. We're all in on ML. There's more blockchain. I would introduce another one that many people know, but will be a newer one that people will hear more about. And I would call it Web 3.0. I think we're moving into a new internet long term, and that new internet will partially be based on decentralized storage that will be created out of blockchain network bases, which are largely crypto oriented. Their value creation is being driven by crypto value streams, but eventually the storage that is created there will be partially some of the storage utilized to underpin Web 3.0. And the concept around Web 3.0, which I'm not the expert to pitch Web 3.0, and there are many, many better, but I do believe in it, is very much associated with this concept that I lay out there in regards to data sovereignty and data trust. And the essential concept of Web 3.0, or one of them, is that in Web 2.0, which is a two-way read-write communication that is largely owned by brands. The difference is that the content that drives the internet now is owned by the brands, not the user.
Okay.
In Web 3.0, the content would still be owned by the user, and the brands or applications would be able to call to that content. So it flips the ownership of the content on its head, and that's part of data sovereignty and data privacy. And by the way, all of the brands that participate in the web today will participate in Web 3.0, but we're talking about structural technology changes to address problem statements. And right now, I think the problem statements du jour are growth and sprawl. We will be left with trust as an unending mission statement that all of us will need to be solving in many ways. Web 3.0 will be very much a buzz term and a trend or shift that will be emblematic of that.
Well, let me see if I get an example of that in terms of, the brands or the users own the data. For example, in the world of social media, it's hard to say who owns the data. I guess Twitter owns that data, or Facebook owns that data, but the users are creating it. Is that what you mean in terms of ownership of data, or what do you mean by who owns the data?
It is close to that, without mentioning a specific social media brand. Generally, you upload a photo. That photo is essentially co-owned by you in terms of your account, but also by the brand and by the company. if a social media company built an application on decentralized storage in a Web 3.0 environment, that
Sure.
user would have full ownership of that photo forever. They could
Hmm.
take it offline completely forever or keep it online, and even decide which platforms could access it or not access it, but multiple platforms could access it at the same time. So it gives a lot more power to the content owner.
Hmm.
It gets a lot more copyright protection and monetization capability for the content owner, while still allowing the value add of a social application to build the value add stack on top of it in order to get traffic and attract customers and users to that content.
Hmm. Jeff, it's going to be amazing to follow the sector in the years ahead. At any rate, I really appreciate you being on and sharing expertise. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time and enjoy your show.